I died for 19 minutes, and in that time, I saw something that shook me to my core. I saw a white horse, radiant and powerful, with a rider whose eyes blazed like fire. And he was leaving. He was leaving Rome. He was leaving the cathedrals. He was leaving the institutions that bear his name, not in anger, but in grief, because they had replaced him with rituals, traded his presence for programs, and built monuments to themselves while using his name. My name is Marie Brennan. I was 55 years old when my heart stopped during a routine surgery. And what Jesus showed me in those 19 minutes will either terrify you or set you free. If you feel something stirring in your chest right now, don't leave. Because this vision wasn't just for me. It was for you. I need to tell you who I was before I died, because it matters. I wasn't some wild-eyed mystic or someone prone to visions and spiritual experiences. I was practical, grounded, a lifelong Catholic who attended Mass every Sunday without fail. I grew up in Boston in a devout Irish Catholic family where faith was woven into everything we did. My grandmother's rosary hung in our kitchen. Pictures of the Pope and the Sacred Heart of Jesus adorned our walls. We said grace before every meal, went to confession regularly, and never missed the holy days of obligation. My faith wasn't just a part of my life. It was my life. I believed in the church. I trusted the institution. I found comfort in the liturgy, the traditions, the ancient prayers that had been spoken for centuries. There was something beautiful about being part of something so old, so established, so seemingly unshakable. By the time I was in my 50s, I had dedicated my entire adult life to the church. I taught CCD classes to children preparing for their first communion. I volunteered at parish events. I organized fundraisers and bake sales. I served on committees. Everyone knew me as a faithful, devoted Catholic woman who loved God and loved the church. But if I'm being honest, somewhere along the way, I started loving the institution more than I loved Jesus. I loved the familiarity of it, the predictability, the sense of belonging, the feeling that I was part of something important and historical. I loved the rituals and the structure and the certainty that came with having a pope and bishops and priests who could tell me exactly what to believe and how to live. I didn't have to seek God for myself because the church did it for me. I didn't have to hear his voice because the priests spoke for him. I didn't have to wrestle with scripture because the magisterium interpreted it for me. It was comfortable, safe, and completely dead. But I didn't know that yet. I thought my faith was strong. I thought I was close to God. I thought attending Mass and saying my prayers and following all the rules meant I knew him. I had no idea that I had traded intimacy for institution, presence for performance, and the living God for religious routine. I wouldn't understand any of that until I died. The day it happened was completely ordinary. I had been having some issues with my heart, irregular rhythms and chest pain, and my doctor recommended a procedure to correct it. Nothing major, he assured me. Routine, low risk. I'd be home the same day. I wasn't worried. I went to Mass that morning, lit a candle for the saints to watch over me, and drove to the hospital with my husband. He kissed me before they wheeled me into the operating room and told me he'd see me soon. Those were the last words I heard before the anesthesia took me under. But something went wrong during the procedure. My heart, already weakened and unstable, couldn't handle the stress. It stopped. Completely. Flatlined. The medical team rushed into action, starting CPR, shocking my chest with the defibrillator, pumping me full of drugs to restart my heart. But I wasn't there anymore. I had already left my body. I didn't know I was dead at first. I just knew I wasn't in the operating room anymore. The sterile white lights and beeping machines had disappeared, replaced by darkness. Not a frightening darkness, but a deep, velvety black that felt strangely peaceful. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't in pain. I just was. Existing in a place that wasn't a place, suspended in a silence so profound it felt like the absence of sound itself. I don't know how long I was in that darkness. Time didn't exist there. But gradually, slowly, I became aware that I wasn't alone. There was a presence with me, not beside me or in front of me, but all around me, so vast and overwhelming that I felt like I was drowning in it. And then I heard a voice. Not an audible voice like human speech, but a voice that seemed to come from inside my own chest, from the very core of my being. "Catherine," it said, and I knew immediately who it was. It was Jesus. Not the pale, distant Jesus from the stained glass windows, not the suffering Jesus on the crucifix, but the living, breathing, blazing Jesus who existed before the Church, before the Vatican, before any human institution tried to contain him. And he said, "I need to show you something. You need to see what is happening. You need to understand what is coming." Suddenly, the darkness lifted, and I found myself standing in a place I recognized instantly. Rome, the eternal city. But I wasn't seeing it from the ground. I was suspended above it, hovering in the air like I was watching from the heavens themselves. I could see the Vatican below me, the dome of St. Peter's Basilica rising into the sky, the vast piazza spread out before it. I could see the tourists and pilgrims milling about, the Swiss guards in their colorful uniforms, the priests in their black cassocks hurrying between buildings. It all looked exactly as it always had, ancient, powerful, eternal. But then I noticed something else. The atmosphere over the city felt heavy, oppressive, like a thick fog had settled over everything. And the light, the spiritual light that I would have expected to radiate from such a holy place, was dim, fading, flickering like a candle about to go out. And then I saw him, Jesus, but not in the way I expected. He was sitting on a white horse, magnificent and terrifying all at once. The horse was pure white, so bright it almost hurt to look at, and its eyes burned with an intelligence that was not of this world. And the rider, Jesus himself, was unlike anything I had ever imagined. He wasn't the gentle shepherd from the children's Bible stories. He wasn't the meek and mild savior from the paintings. He was powerful, fierce. His eyes blazed like flames, piercing through everything they looked at. His face was both beautiful and terrible, full of love and grief and righteous anger all at the same time. He wore a robe dipped in blood, and on his thigh was written a name, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. This was the Jesus of Revelation, the conquering Christ, the judge of all the earth. And he was leaving. I watched as he turned the white horse away from the Vatican, away from St. Peter's, away from all the grand cathedrals and basilicas and monuments that had been built in his name. And as he did, I heard him weep, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to echo through the spiritual realm. "I called them to be my bride," he said, his voice breaking with grief. "But they fell in love with their buildings. I called them to know me, but they chose religion instead. I offered them my presence, but they preferred their programs. I gave them my spirit, but they built systems to control him. And now I am leaving, not because I want to, but because they have pushed me out. Write, 'I surrender' in the comments right now if you can feel the weight of what I'm telling you. Don't wait, because what I'm about to show you will change everything." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. "The church is your church," I wanted to say. "These are your people. These are the faithful who have served you for 2,000 years. But before I could speak, he showed me more. He showed me inside the buildings, inside the cathedrals and churches and basilicas that looked so holy from the outside. And what I saw broke my heart. I saw priests going through the motions of Mass without any sense of his presence. I saw them reciting ancient words with dead hearts, performing rituals they no longer believed in, offering sacraments that had become empty tradition. I saw bishops more concerned with protecting the institution than with protecting the sheep. I saw cover-ups and politics and power struggles, all hidden behind stained glass and incense and elaborate vestments. I saw money being counted while the poor went unfed. I saw committees and meetings and endless debates about doctrine while people outside the walls were dying without ever hearing the real gospel. And then He showed me the people in the pews. Faithful Catholics, like I had been, showing up every Sunday, saying their prayers, following the rules. But their hearts were empty. They were going through the motions, checking boxes, fulfilling obligations, but they didn't know him. They knew about him. They knew the catechism and the liturgy and the traditions, but they had never encountered him. They had never heard his voice. They had never felt his presence. They had religion, but they didn't have relationship. And Jesus wept over them. "I stand at the door and knock," he said, "but they can't hear me over the sound of their own rituals. I call them by name, but they can't recognize my voice because they've only ever heard the voice of men. I long to fill them with my spirit, but they're already full of religion." Then the vision shifted, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. I saw demons. Actual demons. Not the cartoon versions with horns and pitchforks, but spiritual beings of darkness that radiated malice and hatred. And they were inside the churches, not just hanging around the edges, but woven into the very fabric of the institutions. They were whispering in the ears of leaders, feeding them lies about power and control and self-preservation. They were deceiving the people, making them believe that attendance equals relationship, that ritual equals intimacy, that tradition equals truth. And the worst part was that nobody could see them. The demons moved freely because everyone was so focused on the outward appearance of holiness that they couldn't discern what was happening in the spiritual realm. I saw one particular demon, more powerful than the others, sitting in a place of honor. It was a spirit of religion, cold and calculating, and it had been there for centuries. It fed on dead tradition and empty ritual. It gained strength every time someone chose religion over relationship, every time someone elevated the institution above Jesus himself, every time someone trusted the system more than they trusted the Holy Spirit. And this demon was celebrating, because it had successfully convinced millions of people that they were close to God when they were actually far from him. It had built a counterfeit that looked so much like the real thing that hardly anyone could tell the difference. But Jesus could tell, and he was leaving because there was no room for him anymore. "Catherine," he said, turning to me, "this is not just about Rome. This is about every place where my name is spoken, but my presence is absent. Every church that has become a business, every denomination that cares more about being right than about being loving, every religious system that puts rules above relationship. I am leaving them all, not because I've given up, but because I'm going somewhere else. I'm going to the hungry ones, the desperate ones, the ones who aren't satisfied with religion and are crying out for the real thing. I'm going to the homes and the streets and the hidden places where people gather in my name with nothing but hunger for me. That's where I'll be. That's where my spirit is moving. Not in the monuments men have built, but in the hearts that are open to receive me." Then he showed me something that gave me hope. I saw small groups of people, scattered all over the world, gathering in homes and parks and coffee shops. They didn't have fancy buildings or elaborate liturgies. They didn't have programs or committees or institutional backing. But they had him. I could see his presence with them, thick and tangible, moving among them as they prayed and worshipped and studied his word together. These were people who had left the dead institutions, not out of rebellion, but out of hunger. They had tried the religious systems and found them empty. They had sat in the pews and sang the songs and followed the rules, but they were starving for something real. So they left. And when they did, they found Jesus waiting for them outside the walls. He wasn't in the buildings anymore. He was in the wilderness, calling his people out, gathering the remnant, preparing them for what was coming. "This is the new thing I am doing," Jesus said. "I am stripping away everything that is not from me. Every structure that men have built in my name that has become a substitute for my presence. Every tradition that has become more important than my voice. Every institution that has elevated itself above my word. I am shaking it all. And what cannot be shaken will remain. But what is built on the wisdom of men and the pride of religion will fall. And Catherine, you need to tell them. You need to warn them. The white horse is leaving Rome, and it's not coming back. Tell my people to follow me out. Tell them not to cling to the buildings and the systems and the familiar rituals. Tell them to leave it all behind and come into the wilderness with me. That's where the real revival is happening. That's where the bride is being prepared. Not in the cathedrals, but in the hidden places where hungry hearts are seeking my face. I was overwhelmed, terrified. Lord, I said, who will listen to me? I'm nobody, just an ordinary Catholic woman. They'll think I'm crazy. They'll say I'm being deceived. They'll accuse me of turning my back on the church. He looked at me with such love and such fire that I thought I might shatter. Catherine, he said, I'm not asking you to turn your back on me. I'm asking you to stop confusing the institution with me. The church is not a building. It's not an organization. It's my people. And my people are leaving the buildings because I'm calling them out. Some will hear and follow. Others will stay and perish with the system. But you have to tell them. You have to give them the choice. The white horse is leaving, and anyone who wants to follow me has to leave too. Then I felt it. A pull. A powerful, irresistible force drawing me backward. I was being pulled back into my body, back into the operating room, back into life. Lord, wait! I cried out. I don't understand everything. I don't know what to do. But his voice was already fading. Tell them, he said. Tell them I love them too much to leave them in dead religion. Tell them to follow the white horse. Tell them the hour is late, and I'm gathering my bride. But she's not in Rome anymore. She's in the wilderness, being purified and prepared. Tell them to come out. And then, with a jolt that felt like lightning striking my chest, I was back. I gasped, choking on the tube in my throat. Alarms were blaring. People were shouting. Someone was saying, "We've got her back. She's alive." My eyes flew open, and I saw the bright lights of the operating room, the masked faces of doctors and nurses hovering over me. I had been dead for 19 minutes. 19 minutes that changed everything. The first few weeks after I came back were the hardest of my life. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. The white horse leaving Rome. Jesus weeping over the institutions that bore his name. The demons hiding in plain sight within the very structures that claimed to represent him. And the small groups of hungry believers gathering in hidden places, desperate for his presence. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to process it. For days, I said nothing to anyone. I went through the motions of recovery, letting my husband fuss over me, accepting visits from concerned friends. But inside, I was in turmoil. Everything I had believed in, everything I had built my life on, had been called into question. Was the church really that corrupt? Had Jesus really left? Was I supposed to leave too? I started going back to Mass after I was strong enough. But it was different now. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. I would sit in the pew and watch the priest go through the liturgy, and all I could think was, is Jesus even here? I would look around at the other people, faithful Catholics who had been coming for decades, and I would wonder, do any of them actually know him? The rituals that had once brought me comfort now felt empty. The prayers that had once seemed sacred now sounded like vain repetitions. The entire experience felt dead, like I was sitting in a museum looking at artifacts of a faith that used to be alive but wasn't anymore. And it broke my heart. Because I loved the church, I loved the traditions, I loved the sense of history and continuity. But I loved Jesus more. And if he wasn't there, then what was the point? I started praying differently. Instead of reciting memorized prayers, I just talked to him. I poured out my confusion and my fear and my questions. And slowly, gradually, he started speaking to me. Not audibly, but in that deep, unmistakable way where you know it's him and not just your own thoughts. He told me he hadn't abandoned me. He told me he was calling me out, not to punish me, but to set me free. He told me that what I had seen was real, and that he was shaking everything that could be shaken so that only what was truly his would remain. And he told me I had a choice. I could stay in the comfortable, familiar religious system and slowly die spiritually, or I could follow him into the unknown and discover what it meant to really be his bride. The choice was terrifying, but it was also the easiest choice I ever made. I stopped going to Mass, not out of anger or rebellion, but because I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep participating in something that felt dead when I had tasted what it meant to be alive in his presence. My husband didn't understand at first. Neither did my friends. They were worried about me. They thought my near-death experience had confused me, that I was going through some kind of spiritual crisis. And maybe I was. But it was the kind of crisis that leads to transformation, not destruction. I started meeting with a small group of believers who had also left their traditional churches. We gathered in a living room once a week, and we didn't have a program or a liturgy or a leader. We just came hungry for Jesus. And he showed up. Every single time. His presence was so thick you could almost touch it. People were healed. Burdens were lifted. Hearts were transformed. We would pray and worship and cry and laugh, and it was messy and unpredictable and absolutely beautiful. This was the church. Not a building, not an institution, just a group of broken people desperate for a living God. If you're reading this and your heart is pounding, if something inside you is screaming yes or no or I don't know, write I surrender in the comments, because Jesus is calling people out right now. Not out of his church, but out of dead religion, out of systems that have replaced him with programs, out of institutions that care more about preserving themselves than about his presence. Write it and let him know you're ready to follow the white horse wherever it goes. But here's what I need you to understand. This message isn't about bashing the Catholic Church or any other denomination. This isn't about saying one group is right and another is wrong. This is about something much bigger. This is about the fact that Jesus is shaking every system, every structure, every institution that has put itself in his place. And that includes Protestant churches, evangelical megachurches, charismatic movements, all of it. Anywhere his name is used, but his presence is absent, he is leaving. Anywhere religion has replaced relationship, he is walking away. Not because he's giving up on his people, but because he loves them too much to let them stay in bondage to dead systems. He's calling them out. He's gathering the remnant. He's preparing his bride. And the invitation is going out right now. Will you follow? I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, I'm being divisive. You're thinking I'm promoting some kind of anti-church rebellion. You're thinking I've been deceived. And I understand. I would have thought the same thing before I died. But I'm not against the church. I'm for Jesus. And if Jesus isn't in your church, if his presence has been replaced by programs and performance and religious routine, then it's not really his church anymore. It's just a religious organization using his name. And you have to decide what you want. Do you want the comfortable familiarity of religion, or do you want the wild, unpredictable, transforming presence of the living God? You can't have both. Because where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And freedom doesn't fit inside the boxes we've built. Let me tell you what's been happening since I started sharing this message. Hundreds of people have reached out to me. Some are angry, accusing me of heresy and rebellion. But many more are hungry. They're telling me they've felt the same thing, that they've been sitting in churches for years, feeling empty and wondering if there was something more. They're telling me they thought they were the only ones who felt like Jesus wasn't there anymore. They're telling me they've been afraid to leave because they didn't want to abandon God, not realizing that leaving a dead religious system isn't the same as leaving God. In fact, sometimes leaving is the most faithful thing you can do. Because if Jesus is leaving, why would you stay? If the white horse is heading into the wilderness, why would you remain in the empty building? You follow him. No matter what, even if it costs you everything. And it will cost you. It's cost me friendships. People I've known for decades won't speak to me anymore. I've been uninvited from family gatherings because I'm causing division. I've been called a heretic, a false prophet, deceived by the enemy. But I've also found Jesus in ways I never knew were possible. I've experienced his presence more in the last 8 months than I did in 55 years of religious life. I've seen him move in power, healing bodies and hearts and minds. I've watched as people who were spiritually dead came alive when they encountered the real Jesus outside the religious system. And I would trade everything, every bit of comfort and acceptance and familiarity, for just one moment in his presence. Because once you've tasted the real thing, you can never go back to the counterfeit. Here's what Jesus showed me about what's coming. He's separating the wheat from the chaff. He's dividing those who truly want him from those who just want religion. He's calling his bride out of Babylon, out of the religious systems that have held her captive, and he's bringing her into the wilderness to purify her and prepare her. It's not going to be comfortable. It's not going to be safe. It's not going to look like anything we're used to, but it's going to be real. And in the days ahead, as the world gets darker and the systems get shakier, you're going to have to choose. Are you going to cling to the religious institution and go down with it? Or are you going to follow Jesus wherever he goes, even if it means leaving everything familiar behind? The white horse is leaving Rome. That's not just a metaphor, it's a spiritual reality that's happening right now. Jesus is removing his presence from institutions that have replaced him with tradition and from churches that care more about their reputation than about his glory. And he's going to the remnant, the hungry ones, the desperate ones, the ones who are willing to risk everything to find him. The question is, will you be one of them? Will you follow the white horse? Or will you stay in the empty building, going through the motions, pretending everything is fine while Jesus is out in the wilderness calling your name? Write, "I surrender," one more time if you're ready. If you're ready to stop playing church and start following Jesus. If you're ready to leave the dead religion and find the living God. If you're ready to be part of the bride that's being prepared in the wilderness instead of the crowd that's comfortable in the pews, write it and mean it. Because this is not a game. This is not about joining a movement or finding a better church or getting a spiritual high. This is about following Jesus wherever he goes, even when it costs you everything, even when everyone thinks you're crazy, even when you lose friends and family and reputation. Because in the end, none of that matters. The only thing that matters is him. And he's leaving the buildings, he's leaving the institutions, he's going to the wilderness, and he's calling you to come with him. I died for 19 minutes, and what I saw changed everything. I saw the white horse leaving Rome, and I knew I had to follow. I had to leave the comfortable religion and go into the unknown with Jesus. And it's been the scariest and most beautiful journey of my life. I don't have all the answers. I don't know exactly what's ahead, but I know I'm with him, and that's enough. So I'm asking you one final time. Will you follow? Will you leave the dead religion and come alive in his presence? Will you answer the call of the wild white horse? The invitation is going out right now. Jesus is gathering his remnant. He's preparing his bride, and he's asking, who will come with me? Write, "I surrender," if your answer is yes, and then start walking. Leave the building. Leave the program. Leave the religious system that's been keeping you from him, and follow the white horse into the wilderness. That's where he is. That's where the real church is being born. That's where the bride is being made ready. Don't stay behind. Don't miss this. The hour is late and the king is calling. Follow him, no matter what it costs, because he's worth it. He's worth everything. I died and came back to tell you. The white horse is leaving Rome. And if you want to be where Jesus is, you have to follow him out. Write, "I surrender," and start walking. Today, right now, before it's too late.